brains are prediction machines. They crave certainty because they have a sense if they've got certainty, they're better placed to protect us. And the key goal of the brain, I think part of the reason why COVID was so scary initially, it was unpredictable, it was uncontrollable, and that is a very difficult thing for the human brain. We are deeply, deeply social creatures, and we are constantly checking out, do I fit in, do I belong? And so really important in where we are in hybrid working, those little things that just make us feel connected is really important. It's not that our brains don't need any stress, they do need some. We need a bit of a challenge to get ourselves going. The human brain, when it works at its best, is that sense of I'm challenged, I'm stretched.
Welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere, where CEOs, leaders, and experts at building teams,
companies,
organizations,
and amazing cultures share how to lead from anywhere in the world. I'm your co-host on the East Coast, Ginny Bianco Mathis.
And I'm your co-host on the West Coast, Mitch Simon. And we invite you to join us to Team Anywhere. Hello and welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere. I am Mitch Simon, your co-host on the West Coast, and on the East Coast is our amazing, lovely, beautiful, and brilliant Dr. Virginia Bianco Mathis. How are you doing today, Ginny?
Well, after that introduction, I am just doing beautifully. Thank you.
Beautiful. Can you introduce our beautiful, wise, intelligent, experienced guest?
Yes, I can. You have a favoritism for certain words today, but that's great.
Those are my words today. Sorry, we're done.
Yes, okay. Today we have Hilary Scarlett, a founder of Scarlett Grey, who is an international speaker, consultant, and author on organizational change, taking neuroscience out of the lab and into the workplace. And we like that. This is very exciting for us. Her work has spanned Europe, the US, Asia, and she concentrates on the development of people-focused change management and programs. She's the author of 2 leading books, Neuroscience for Organizational Change and Tips on Building a Brain-Friendly Workplace. Oh boy, that is what a really good organization should advertise, right? Come work for us. We are a brain-friendly workplace. Hilary, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, excellent. Well, coming from London, we'll see if the perspectives are the same or different. And the work that you have been involved in with your clients, what have you learned from the past 2 years in terms of the workplace, yourself, hybrid? What's hit you?
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, work has changed hugely over the last few years, hasn't it? If we think back to 3 years ago. I guess one thing that struck me just going back to 3 years ago is how incredibly adaptable and flexible and resourceful human beings are, that kind of literally overnight, those who could work from home did start working from home. People adapted very quickly to that. Organizations equipped them to do that. So I think that was kind of one of the really positive messages coming out of it, that we are very resourceful, we are very resilient, we are very, very adaptable. So I think that was one of the good things that came from that. I guess another good thing that's come from that is the whole thing about flexible working, hybrid working. I think up until 3 years ago, a lot of organizations I was working with were talking about flexible working. There was a little bit of it going on. They're putting their toe in the water, but I don't think they were doing it wholeheartedly. I think there was a sense of if people are not in the office, if we can't see them in the workplace, are they really working? Well, from 3 years ago, we kind of had to trust people, and people showed that it could work. So I think that's been, again, another great bonus is that ability to work flexibly, that ability to work anywhere for some people. I mean, in some roles, indeed, I know various people who are now kind of working around the world because they can. It's have laptop and will travel. So that's been some of the really good things that have come out of it. I think another side of thing that really struck us was the bit about social connection, the need for relationships. That I think. I think a lot of people struggled during the lockdowns of not being able to be around people, not seeing people. I think especially people who were new into organizations, it was very difficult to form a relationship with team members who you'd never actually met. So I think that was difficult, and I think that was more difficult for certain people than others too, in terms of that kind of lack of social connection with others. But again, on the upside, I would say I think maybe it's made us recognise a bit more how important relationships are at work and how important social connection is. Because no doubt come on to this later, but I do think that's an area that historically organizations have undervalued our need for relationships and social connection at work. So maybe those months of being apart has made us realize that and value relationships more.
Yes, yes. And in a way, it's made us conscious how much we were taking for granted. Well, that person's down the hall, I can get to that. And now we're becoming conscious not only for good old Joe, who I've known for 10 years, but good old Joe over in London, who I've never met. Another side is we're almost increasing it. Anyway, lovely. And now you have this whole neuroscience thing. So why did you decide to write 2 books on neuroscience? What did you want readers and leaders and teams to concentrate on to get out of this?
Well, I guess the first one, Neuroscience for Organizational Change, the first edition came out quite a few years ago now. And I guess part of why I wrote it is when I was doing my applied neuroscience studies, just about every week there was something useful, there was something interesting. And often just that feeling of, phew, it's not just me that feels that way when that things happen. That's how our brains respond to certain things. So I just found it incredibly useful on a personal level, both in terms of work and in terms of home life as well. So, and I just thought there's lots of useful science and evidence there that's really useful to leaders in organizations, to people who work in human resources, to people who work in change, to people who work in communications, that it brings a bit more evidence and science to what's going on. And in some cases, I think what it's doing is probably reinforcing the gut feelings, the gut instincts of good leaders about what is a good way to lead people. But in other areas, I think there are useful insights about what is important to the human brain. And I guess for most of us, our brains are our key work tool, so to speak. That's all we've got to work with. And I'm a big believer that if we can understand them better, then we can work with that knowledge and perhaps get more out of our brains and the brains of our co-workers and team members. So I just really think all of us, particularly now, need to understand our brains a bit better and use that knowledge for our own benefit and for the benefit of the organizations we work in. So, and neuroscience is still pretty new. I mean, in a way, it's technology is what's really moving on our knowledge of the brain. And important technology like fMRI scanners have only been much more available for the last 30 years or so. So that's why we're hearing much more about neuroscience now than we did 50 years ago or whatever. It's because technology is really moving on our understanding of the brain. So it's now at a stage where there is enough useful information there, I think, to make it relevant to organizations and to people who work in them. So I guess I kind of felt that I really wanted to share that knowledge with people because I just found it so useful myself.
So one of the things you did find is the brain does not like change. So given that, and having some of that knowledge, how should a leader go about dealing with change, especially during these times of a lot of change?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, on the whole, our brains are brilliant things, but there's certain things that our brains look for, that they crave, that change takes away from us. So some of those things are our brains are prediction machines. They crave certainty because they have a sense if they've got certainty, they're better placed to protect us, and the key goal of the brain is safety and survival. Change often takes that away. It means I don't know what's coming up. Also, our brains like things that want to have a sense of control. And again, often with organizational change, we have a sense it's been imposed upon us and that we might lack influence over it. And I guess just going back to COVID, I think part of the reason why COVID was so scary initially, it was unpredictable, it was uncontrollable, and that is a very difficult thing for the human brain. So I think partly just recognizing that there's certain things brains look for and find difficult, and just being aware of that is really important. So just initially, fundamentally understanding the brain and what it needs and what it looks for is important in terms of change. And what change, uncertainty, a lack of control can create is a kind of threat state in the brain, sort of fight or flight. People might be familiar with that term, where the brain's kind of it's kind of almost like an alert error goes off in our brains. We can't quite settle again until we have got certainty, and have got a sense of control over what's coming up. So I think one of the things for leaders is really important for them is initially to be aware of that threat response in our brains, because when we are in that threat state, when we are in fight or flight, we cannot think at our best. Fight or flight takes precedence in the brain, and the part of the brain that's so important in terms of thinking and decision making, called the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain behind our foreheads, kind of gets deprioritized by the brain in a sense when we're in fight or flight. So we cannot think at our best. So one is being aware of it, and then two, I think it's looking for those things like, where can we, in a world where we might feel we haven't got much certainty, and at the moment I think that's true in the workplace and outside the workplace too. I think, in terms of what's going on in the world at the moment, in terms of conflicts and energy crisis and climate crisis, we have a lot of uncertainty in outside work as well. Is where can we provide perhaps a bit more certainty for employees? So it can be little things so a leader might be, okay, I can't give you certainty about what's coming up in this organization, but I do guarantee I will sit down with you every Tuesday morning, for example, and tell you what I do or don't know. So at least giving employees some certainty around communication and that relationship. And again, I think helping people to understand what they can control, what they can influence. The brain tends to get quite distracted by all the things and all the issues that we can't resolve. So helping people just to focus on the things that we can achieve, that we can focus on. And also, I think in a time if we're feeling quite sort of a bit out of our depth, a bit overwhelmed, little things like setting people short-term goals. If we're getting anxious about what might be happening next week, a few months' time or whatever, just setting people short-term achievable goals. Because at least if each day I feel like I'm achieving a goal, I get to the end of the working day and can kind of go, tick, check, I've done that. That feels good to the brain. It feels rewarding to the brain. It's settling to the brain. And it means I can go back into work the following morning in a slightly more positive place than I would have been. So part of the beauty of neuroscience, I think, is that lots of little things can make a big difference to us. And that's one of the other really good things about it. Just little things that leaders can go away and do that just help settle the brain, help people focus, help people collaborate better or perform better.
Yeah, and so the little like short-term goals, even week to week, and these chats that we are encouraging leaders to have, that gives a nice cadence to the discussions you might have. That also then gives a nice sense of security, or at least better. And I don't know either. And we're going to explore it together and work on it together. So every Friday at 3, we have this ping of perhaps settling on the brain. I love those 3 things that you mentioned, Mitch.
Yeah. The show's Team Anywhere. And I just want to know, in terms of what they're finding in neuroscience, what you found or they're finding lately, what is going on in our brains as we are separated from our colleagues, and what can leaders do to alleviate the suffering that's going on with people not having that face-to-face interaction every day?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and we are deeply, deeply social creatures, and we are constantly checking out: do I fit in? Do I belong? And so, really important in especially in days of where we are in hybrid working or working remotely, just perhaps spending some time at the beginning of meetings, just doing some of that kind of social exchange, those bits of just asking about the family or the weekend or whatever, those little things that just make us feel connected is really important, rather than just, because I think when we're working online, we tend to be much more business and straight into the meeting. And if we were in a workplace together, there would be those moments in the kitchen over the coffee machine or whatever, where we would just have that sort of small talk chit chat, where we would get to know each other a bit more. So I think I think more of that. I think one of the things that kind of bonds people is a sense of vulnerability. So I think leaders who are prepared to say, I'm finding this difficult, or just sharing some of those things too, makes it okay for other team members to say, actually, I'm finding this bit difficult as well. So sharing little bits of vulnerability, I think, are really important in terms of helping people to bond and create connections and relationships.
Hi, we are taking a quick break to remind you to support our podcast by hitting the subscribe button and leaving us a review. Your feedback means a lot to us. And with that, we can put together more engaging and thought-provoking content for leadership and remote work. Right. Let's go on. In your book, on the friendly workplace, you talk about a notion of things that have to be considered, 6 factors. Can you explain what those are and why we should consider them?
Sure, so that's in the little book, Brain Power at Work. Yeah, so there are 6 factors that research and science has showed they're all important to all of us, but we do have different preferences. If we've got them, research shows that our brains tend to be in a more positive place. We can collaborate better. We can be more creative. We're more resilient. We're more curious about the world. All things that are important for work. If we haven't got these 6 factors, our brains go into this threat state that I mentioned earlier, where we're distracted. We can't quite focus properly. We can't think as well. We're not as creative. The 6 factors are, the first one is self-esteem. So that's that sense of feeling good about ourselves, having a positive narrative about ourselves, feeling respected by others, feeling trusted by others. It's also, that one also reflects kind of mastery of skills. So if I feel I'm getting better at things and developing, again, I'm more likely to be in a positive place in terms of self-esteem than in a threat state. The P stands for purpose. And there's lots of research, I'm sure you're familiar with it, that shows that the importance of having a sense of purpose in our work, that if I feel what I do is meaningful and makes a difference, and particularly because we are such social creatures that it has a positive impact on other people, again, that makes a big difference to how we feel about the world in general, having a sense of purpose and meaning, and that my work makes a difference. The A in spaces stands for autonomy, that I've touched on, that sense of having some control, some influence. As human beings, we want to feel we've got a little bit of control over something, that we're not complete victims of what's going on. So the question there often, I think, for leaders is where can you let go? Where can you give people a bit of influence over what's going on, be it change in the organisation, whatever it is? If people feel they've got a bit of control, that helps to put their brains into a much more constructive, positive place. The C is for certainty. I touched on it as well. That sense that our brains crave information because they feel they've got information, they're better placed to protect us. So our brains say crave information and certainty, too much so because I think, as we all know, it's something we can never have is complete certainty, but it's what our brains want, so they can better protect us. And research even shows that the human brain on the whole can deal with bad news, even really bad news. Is the not knowing that is so difficult for our human brains. So again, the importance of leaders getting out there and giving people information. And I'll give you an example. Actually, during the banking crisis a while ago, I was working with a bank, and the part of the bank called the bad bank in inverted commas. It was the bit of the bank.
Wait, the banking crisis a while ago, or the banking crisis like today?
Oh, this is one a while ago. But I'm sure the same would be true today. And I was working with you're true. How these things come around again. I was working with a group of leaders who were in a part of the bank that was going to be closed down or sold off. And so they all knew they were going to be out of a job in about 18 months' time. And I was brought in to help work with them because they said they're all going to be out of a job in 18 months' time. It's all going, but we need them to keep performing until then. So I did work with them, and they did. These leaders did an extraordinary job. You know, in the end, they hit their targets better than people back in the main bank. Their employee engagement scores were higher than people back in the main bank. And when I said to them, "How are you doing this?" they said, "Because we know we're out of a job in 18 months' time. So we can kind of make a plan. We're thinking about our resumes, our CVs. We kind of think about what skills are useful to us. We're making a plan." The people back in the main bank right now, they might think their jobs are secure, but we all know banking's a bit precarious and they can't make a plan. So that really brought home to me a bit about even the difficult news about my job is going. Once we've got that news, we can kind of take back some control. So certainty, so even if it's bad news, I think our brains, once we're over the initial shock, we can kind of get on, make a plan. So certainty or autonomy closely related. The E stands for equity and a sense of fair play. And research shows that when an organisation is going through change, our need for a sense of fair play goes up even more. That we have a sense of if there's going to be change around here, then I want to know I've got as good a chance as the next person of getting the resources I want, or training or job that I want. So our need for a sense of fair play, equity, does go up when we're going through change. And S, the last space is for social connection that we've touched on already. But one, say, I think is hugely important. We are deeply social creatures. Research shows, although social connection and relationships are often talked about as soft skills in the organisation, research shows that absolutely not. They have a big impact if we feel we belong, if we feel our manager is taking an interest in us, if we feel we're part of a team, we are much more able to perform and better perform well. So there's nothing soft about it. So the importance of social connection, it makes a big difference to our ability to perform. And I think also there might be times in the organisation, especially if the organisation is going through change, there might be times when a leader says, "I can't give you more certainty right now, that, perhaps there are other things I can't do." But there's always something we can do around social connection, I think. That's every one of us can do something that just helps to make people feel they do belong, they do matter, someone is interested in their welfare.
Do we have any data that demonstrates what happens when a company is strong in spaces and when a company is weak in spaces?
I think in terms of just each of the areas, each of the 6 have been shown to be important in terms of organizational success. So and I guess add all 6 together, and that would be a very good place to be, in a sense. If people have got all 6, brains are in a very positive place. If people have none of the 6, their brains are in a very negative place indeed. And it's very hard to negotiate with somebody who feels they've got none of the 6. So why it's so important to move some of them across to more of the reward state. And again, I've run sessions and gone through the 6 spaces, the 6 factors, and talked about them and the impact on our brains. And at the end of those sessions, sometimes people said to me, "Thank you so much. That was really helpful." Because either they were in a job they were miserable in, or they are in a job that they're miserable in. And they said, "I thought there was something wrong with me, but I now realize it's not something wrong with me. It's actually the working environment I'm in. I've got none of the 6 factors." So it can be really useful in that sense too.
Well, I want to ask a question around the brain. So with these 6 with spaces, when I have a happy brain, what does it allow me to? So as an employee, if I create for an employee happy brain, what comes out of that employee versus if I create an employee with sad brain? Like, what are the differences? I'm assuming like creativity. I'm just wondering what happens when brains are in good spaces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you say things like creativity, because when we're in a bad place, when we're in fight or flight or feeling stressed or frazzled or whatever, in a sense, all our energy is about looking after me and my welfare and survival. If we are free of those things, then in a sense, we can use our energy to be curious, to connect with other people. we're better at problem solving and things like that. I mean, in some of the workshops I run, I just do a very simple exercise with people where we start off with something that's quite fun, and then I'm putting them under more and more pressure by speeding up on a particular task. And you just see how quickly their creativity goes out the window in the space of 2 minutes. Is that fast? Initially, they can think of all sorts of things, then they can't because I'm putting them under pressure. So I think all those, when our brains are in a more positive state, yeah, we're better at problem solving, we're more curious, we can use our energy to support other people. I mean, all the things that are important to organizations, we can be those things. But I have to say, it's not that our brains don't need any stress. They do need some. We need a bit of a challenge to get ourselves going. But it's a fine balance. Our brains, the human brain, when it works its best, is that sense of I'm challenged, I'm stretched, but I'm up to it. I can do it. And that's the fine balance we need to find. And that's what leaders need to find, is challenge and stretch people, but don't overwhelm them, that they feel they're capable and they're competent.
So one can take these factors, these 6 factors, and almost use it as a bit of a checklist, saying, how can I keep the brains more excited in terms of the team and who I'm dealing with? So have I touched base? Have we done an activity that encourages engagement? Have I, in the last phone call, acknowledge that person and say, how is that project going? Some kind of interest that I'm valued. I can almost go through that, which is fabulous because we're out here. Mitch and I are out here. We're having wonderful folks like you, but unlike you, they're saying, well, you need empathy. Well, you have to have these chats with people and ask them these questions. All those are wonderful, but your 6 factors are magical almost.
As you say, I think they are a really useful checklist. I use them as a planning tool with people in session. Say, what have you got coming up? It could be something small. It could be a meeting. It could be appraisals. It could be change on a macro scale. What have you got coming up, and how do you plan that thing, whatever it is, to make sure as much as possible people have got those 6 factors? And so in some cases it might help you recognize you haven't got one of those factors, but okay, can you do more on some of the others, because it's really important that at least some of those 6 factors are in a positive place. So absolutely, it's useful as a planning tool. It's useful in a meeting. If you're in a meeting and suddenly somebody seems to get quite angry or upset or aggressive with you, have I perhaps taken one of those 6 away from them? So in the moment, it's useful. And retrospectively, I've had clients too that have planned sessions that perhaps haven't gone quite according to plan. They've used it retrospectively and said, oh yeah, because I didn't place enough emphasis on autonomy or whatever it might have been. So planning ahead, in the moment, retrospectively, it's useful for all of those. Yeah.
Oh, that is just wonderful. And you explained one of the other questions I had. When you go in and work with a leader or a team, you can say, what do you have coming up? And now let's look at it through these 6 lenses.
Yeah.
Both in terms of where's your pain and or opportunities we can go after.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Which ones you have got, that's good, and when maybe there's a bit of a gap or a shortage and needs to work more. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, Hilary, this is just exciting. How can people get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so do come and find me on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. So that's probably the best way to get in touch with me, or via the website scarlettandgrey.com. But LinkedIn is good.
Oh, fabulous. Mitch.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Thanks for coming to us from London.
Pleasure.
When I look back and I look at what Ginny and I decided over 2 years ago to create was a space for us to really find out answers on how to support teams anywhere. And when I look at your 6, I can see that we've, I think Ginny and I both have developed content around these 6 things, which is, what did people need? We were just looking at it as what do people need, when the pandemic hit? They need to know that they're valued. So leaders, get out there and value your people. They needed to, be reminded of, well, what are we up to? What are we doing? What is our company doing? Because as people were dispersed, you get further from the planet to understand, well, this is what we're doing with this is why you come to work every day. Autonomy, we know that engagement scores went up because people were like, hey, go home, here's a laptop, do what you need to do. Autonomy and productivity went up. Certainty was the killer. Here's what's certain: we do not know. And that was a tough one. It stressed a lot of people out. Equity was, we talked about that, which was that if you were 45, 50 and you were home, you just thought the pandemic was, it's not so bad. I'm living in my 5-bedroom house and my kids are off to college. But if you were living with your grandparents, your parents, and your babies at home, it was really inequitable. And then what we were really talking about was developing social connection. So what can you do to bring vulnerability, to share your situation, and just the pandemic allowed people to see inside people's homes.
So Mitch, you just used it.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
That's really, really great. Big fan of neuroscience. My son is studying neuroscience. So this has been great.
Well, fantastic.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Thank you, Ginny. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in weekly for Team Anywhere. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode of Team Anywhere. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Now, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content from our podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share the video with your friends so they can join the conversation too.